Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for joining us today for the issue that's been plaguing Revit users for years, which is inconsistent shared parameter usage. Once we understand the problem, we'll shift gears and look at two tools out of our Revit Express Tools suites that help resolve the issue: Family Processor and Parameter Jammer. We'll then take a quick look at our upcoming webinars and events, and then close out with a live question and answer session. So just briefly here, I want to talk about what's new. Our current release of both suites is version 5.1.7, which was released back on October 1st. This release contained 3 new tools. One of them is the Parameter Jammer, which we'll be discussing today. It also had Fab Sheets, which is a tool geared towards people doing fabrication work out of Revit, and a free tool, Revit Properties, which is an excellent little extension to Windows itself that adds a right-click option for any Revit file called Revit Properties. When you select that option, it'll pop up a window which will display some key information about the Revit file, including the Revit file version, whether the file is work shared, where the central file is located, and some other additional useful items of information. We've also added new features to some of our tools. So Spreadsheet Link now has the ability to save a template Excel file when saving settings for Spreadsheet Link Express. This opens up some really wild workflows, which we'll probably be discussing in an upcoming webinar here. We also added the ability to swap out family types and the value of family type parameters with Spreadsheet Link in that last update. Model Compare, we can now save and reload the comparison results, which is great. And in Quick Select, a fantastic new feature, we added a tree view that shows all the selected elements, which really greatly expanded the functionality of Quick Select, and it's just a pretty wild free tool at this point. So definitely check that out. And then lastly, Shared Parameter Manager now has the ability to export shared parameters from projects and families contained in the projects. So you can really generate an exported shared parameter file that contains all of those, which is really nice. So as you can see, we've been quite busy, but that's not the reason we're here today. So let's dive into the problem with shared parameters. I have here, what the heck is a GUID? So to understand the problem with shared parameters, you have to know what a GUID is and a little bit about how Revit thinks about parameters. So some of you may be wondering, what the heck is a GUID? GUID stands for a Global Unique ID, and it's a 128-bit alphanumeric value that can be randomly generated by Microsoft Windows. So some of you may still be wondering what the heck a GUID is, but that's okay. Autodesk uses GUIDs to uniquely identify each shared parameter. And so what I'd like to do is we're going to shift over to Revit here and take a look at really what the problem is. So from the Manage tab here, I'm going to go ahead and crack open the Shared Parameters tool just straight out of Revit, and I'm going to choose to create a new shared parameter file. I'm just going to put this right out on my desktop. We'll call this test1, save it, and in here I'm going to generate just a new group and a new parameter. Just call this test, and we'll just leave all the default settings. I'm going to just go ahead and hit OK. So we've created that new parameter. I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing over again. So I'm going to create another new one. I'm going to call this test2, and we'll save this. We'll generate a new group and a new parameter, which again we'll call test, and we'll leave all of the settings the same and hit OK. And what I'd like to do now is explore those 2 files that we just created. So right off the desktop, we're going to open up test1, and we're going to open up test2. We're going to look at sort of the guts of these 2 shared parameter files. So the issue is whenever you generate a shared parameter, Revit generates a GUID which it assigns to that shared parameter. And it's that GUID that Revit is paying attention to when you add a parameter to a family or a project, and when you choose which parameters to add to a schedule. Revit doesn't care about the name that you assign that parameter. Revit only cares about the GUID which is used under the hood. So the problem is if 2 users create exactly the same parameter with exactly the same name, Revit's going to generate a different GUID under the hood. So here, this is the GUID from this shared parameter file. We'll just pay attention to the first 3 numbers, so 2A5. And then this is the GUID from the other one. And you can see it's completely different, FD6, right? So Revit is going to view these 2 shared parameters as completely different, even though they have the same data type, they have the same name, and all of the same settings. So anytime, if I were to create 2 families and use one of these parameters on each one and then build a schedule using this parameter, one of these families is going to schedule properly, the other one is not. And this is really the issue, and this was definitely fueled by the fact that Autodesk didn't really put forth a standard for us to use in the first place, or really any guidance or central location for shared parameters to be pooled and sourced from. And so every company and every manufacturer and really every Revit user is creating their own shared parameters to handle whatever needs they have. And because of this, and because we're all connected and we're sharing content, you're going to download content or get content from other people that just doesn't have the same shared parameters that you're using. And that's the problem. And so what I'd like to do here is just kind of dive into a couple of our tools and talk about what we're doing to help fix this problem, and how we're doing it in the most, hopefully the most user-friendly or the most useful way possible. So let's close out of these guys here. And we're going to take a look first at Family Processor. Family Processor is one of the paid-for tools available out of our BIM Manager Suite. And the entire idea behind Family Processor is it allows you to make batch changes to family files. So the way this tool works is we've got 3 tabs where we're able to set up the changes that we want to make. So these first 3 tabs here, you can set up changes. And then on the 4th tab here, I'm able to specify the families that I want to run Family Processor on, and then I can click Begin Processing, and Family Processor will open each family one at a time and apply the changes to the family. So there's a lot of different things that this tool can do. What I'd like to do for the purpose of today's demo is focus in on one particular feature that's the most useful here. So we're going to go to the Change Parameters tab, and we're going to look at the Replace with Shared Parameters function. You can think of this function as basically a find and replace for parameters that exist on your families throughout your entire content library. This allows you to sort of batch process all of your families, look for certain conditions, and then replace them with whatever it is you need to replace them with. So let's look at how this works. The way this dialog is laid out, the parameters that I'm seeing here are the parameters from this family that's open up in the background. And so if you have a family where you know things are incorrect, or if you have a family where you know things are correct, and you'd like to use that as an example, you can open up either one of those in this dialog here and then select parameters from it. I also have the ability to just browse out to a different family file somewhere else. So, if I'm trying to build a list from multiple family files, I can just keep choosing Select from Family File, grab that family, pull the parameters from it that I want. So this allows you to just browse for the family. It'll give you the list of parameters. You can add a few of them and hit OK, and it'll continue to add those to your list of parameters to process. The last option, which is what I'm going to show you here, is you have the ability to simply search for parameters by name. So let's take a look at a nice classic example, voltage. So here I'm going to type in voltage, right? And this is a parameter of type electrical potential. And I'm going to add that to my list of things to look for. So I said it was voltage, but it could also be volts, right? This is something that we see quite frequently, voltage versus volts. Or in some cases of manufacturer, maybe you could use V to indicate volts, right? V with the parameter data type of electrical potential. So 3 different scenarios here that are completely possible and happen all the time. I'm sure there's additional ones out there that we could add to this list. But what we're going to do now that we have our 3 conditions is we're going to map all of these to my shared parameter that describes voltage. So the way I do this is I can choose my shared parameter file up top here. And once I've got that selected, when I grab these drop downs, it's going to show me all of the parameters of the data type electrical potential as potentials for, or as options for things to switch these parameters out for. So what this will do is anytime I find the parameter V, I want to swap that out for my parameter, which is called voltage. Anytime I find voltage, I want to swap that out for the parameter called voltage. Because remember, we can have 2 shared parameters that are named exactly the same, but have different GUIDs under the hood. So what this will do is if the GUID is different, even if the name is right, we'll find it and we'll replace it with the correct name and the correct GUID in the family file. So we'll do the same thing for volts. That should also become voltage. So by building up this list of things I want to search for and the things I want to replace them with, this allows me to then batch process my content library. So these settings can be saved. So I can save these settings out for reuse. So maybe this is my family fixing setting, right? I know I'm going to run this to fix all of my families, so I can go ahead and save that. And then later I can reload that by using the open function. So this is something that you may build up over time, right? As you continue to find new inconsistencies, you can just add those to your list of things to process, and then those will be things that get handled automatically moving forward. So once you have these settings configured, what we'll do is on the Select Families and Begin tab, here I'm able to select multiple family files to run this process on. So I can also just run it on the current family file. So if I just want to run it on this one family, that's great. I can choose this, or I can choose multiple family files. I can browse out. You can, grab content off your network. Oops, that's not actually what I wanted. I want to go into this PC. We'll go out. I've got some content on a network drive here. So here's my electrical productivity pack. The source files here. And we'll just grab the 2015 stuff and hit OK. So here's all of my families, and I can start selecting the ones that I want to process and add them to my list. I can do a select all. I can deselect all. I can control select to different families, and I can add those to my list of families to process. You can also process content from multiple locations across your network. So if I've already added a bunch of stuff from O here, and I want to add something from somewhere else, I just happen to have a file on my desktop. So if I go in here, sample families, I can grab this lay in fluorescent light and add that to my list as well. So you can process stuff from all over the place. Once you've got this list built, you have to choose how you want the output to work. So should I resave even if no changes were needed, which is nice for upgrading and compacting files, but that's not what we're talking about here. What I might suggest is that you should save these to an alternate parent folder. That way you're able to process the families, make the changes, and then test them while still leaving your original families intact. So I would select all these settings and then just choose Begin Processing. And Family Processor will open up each file in my list one at a time, make the change, save the change, and then close out and move on to the next family. And the thing that's really great about this, none of these this process in particular, it's not terribly difficult to do through the Revit UI. I can open up a family file, I can use the modify function, and I can change out a parameter. The thing is, if I've got one family to fix, that's okay. I can do that as long as I know how to get into the family editor and change it. But if I have 10 families to fix, that could take me an afternoon. If I have 100 or 1,000 families to fix, that could take me weeks, and that's weeks of time that often the people who have the skills to do this don't have the time to invest. And so that's really where a tool like Family Processor can really come to the rescue and allow you to set up these changes. This is something I can click the Do It button on right before I leave for the on Friday afternoon. I can let this process run over the weekend. So it's a really nice tool to put these powerful functions into the hands of people that know how to use them. Okay, which brings me to my next point. As you can see, Family Processor is hugely powerful and has the ability to batch fix a bunch of issues. But because the tool has such wide-reaching abilities, it's understandable why BIM managers might be hesitant to put this power into the hands of all of their end users. All it would take is one user with some wonky settings who maybe doesn't understand how Family Processor works to process the entire content library and break everything, right? So that's obviously a huge problem. So, but that said, users are still going to run into the problem with shared parameters as they work on their projects. So enter Parameter Jammer. We created Parameter Jammer with the goal of putting the power of Family Processor safely into the hands of even a novice Revit user. So let me switch gears here. We're going to close out, take a look at the Parameter Jammer. So here in this little sample project, I have a sample family here, which is an example chiller that contains the parameters I wanted to schedule. I created a schedule. So these are all the parameters that I want to schedule for this particular chiller. And I also loaded in a Train chiller, just as something we downloaded right off of Train's website and just dropped into the project. So this is not a bash on Train at all. I mean, they didn't know what shared parameters you were going to be using in your project, so they had to create their own. And I mean, this is exactly the problem. So when we take a look at the schedule here, this Train family, it's not ready to receive data in my project. I'm double-clicking in all of these cells right now, and I'm not able to even supply a value. And that's because these shared parameters don't exist in that family file, right? This family file has plenty of shared parameters that do exist that are already containing data, but they're not the same as my shared parameters, and so this just isn't going to work. And so this is really the ideal situation for Parameter Jammer to resolve this issue. So let's go ahead and open up the tool and take a look at how it works. So when I open up Parameter Jammer, you have to specify 3 pieces of information to make this process work. So the first one is I have to select my shared parameter file. So I have just a sample one here that contains the parameters I'm using. The next thing you need to do is choose the schedule that you want to make the family work on. So here I've got my mechanical equipment schedule, and this is just coming right out of my list of schedules in the project. Lastly, you need to choose the family that you want to run this process on. So we try to make it as easy as possible. Again, you're able to choose this Pick Family button and just click on the family you want, and that will populate this drop-down. You can also drop this down and pick out of the families in your project, the one that you want to use. So once you have these 3 pieces of information specified, you can go ahead and click Next. And what we'll do, before I click Next, I want to talk about the process. We go through a 2-step process to go through and make this family work in the schedule. The first step is we identify all of the parameters in the schedule, and then we look at all the parameters in the family. And if any of them have a matching name and a matching data type, we'll swap it out automatically. So we'll swap out that shared parameter, and that'll just work. You don't have to think about that again. You're ready to go. But in this case, so let me click Next. In this case, what it'll do is after it's looked for all the ones that just match, it's going to identify all of the rest of the parameters on the schedule that it could not auto-map. And it's going to display those to me here. So here I see all of the rest of the schedule parameters that it couldn't automatically map to a parameter in the family. And then in the other column, family parameters to swap to, or to swap out, this is going to give me, in a drop-down, options to choose which parameters to map to the ones on my schedule. And we're filtering this list to only show you the parameters that have the same data type. Again, one of our focuses with this tool was to make sure that we're not going to be destroying any data, and so we're trying to guide the user through this process as best as possible. So here I have a chilled water entering temperature on the family. I'm going to go ahead and map that to my evaporator entering temperature on the train family. Or excuse me, this was for my schedule, this is for my family. And so I'm going to keep going through here. I've got my chilled water flow. We'll map that to actual evaporator flow. In this case, the chilled water glycol percentage, if I look over here, I don't really have a parameter that describes that particular value. So what I can choose to do is just add this to the family. So we're going to take this parameter from the schedule and simply add it into the family. And so I can keep going. We also have the ability to not include. So you know, if any one of these I didn't want to include, I could just choose not to include it. Now that field then would not be schedulable in the schedule. So that's just something, that's a trade-off that you have to understand. But I'll just keep going through here. Coefficient of performance, efficiency rating, right? Compressor motor data, maybe that's fan count, unloading steps. By the way, anybody from the MEP world who's watching this, if I'm doing this horribly wrong, I apologize. Cooling, oh, no, we're just going to add that one. Cooling capacity, total cooling capacity, ambient. So we'll keep mapping away here. Location, maybe we'll add that. Model number, and perhaps that's the serial number. The phase, we'll add. The remarks, we'll map to notes. And the unit number, we will map to perhaps unit type. Okay, great. So we have our mapping configured. At this point, we're ready to roll. So I can go ahead and click Next. And it's going to swap these out. Now, there's one last scenario we didn't talk about, and that's what happens if there's a parameter in the family with the name that you want, but a different data type. And that's exactly what's happening here. There's a parameter in the family already called phase, but it wasn't using the correct phase parameter type, the data type. And so in this scenario, what we'll do is we'll rename the parameter in the family to _old. So we convert it to a family parameter and then rename it _old. And then we'll push in the parameter phase from the schedule to make it work. So, and by doing this, we're ensuring that no data is going to be destroyed. I don't know that I mentioned, this is true of family processor as well. Anytime we're swapping out these parameters, we are going to be, it's a very non-destructive change. It's going to be retaining the parameter value, and it's also going to be retaining the usage of that parameter and any formulas that might exist on the family file. So it's a very clean change to make, to go through and make sure everything stays intact. So I'm just going to go ahead and say yes to this. I want you to continue. And it's going to go ahead, it's going to process all of these. It'll just tell you what it did here. It's going to tell you what it's added and what it's changed. And when I click Finish and go back to the schedule, you can see that this guy is now completely ready to appear on this schedule. So I've mapped everything. It's now ready to receive data. So, and this was, again, the whole idea, is just to get the correct shared parameters into the family so that the family can work properly with your schedule.